I'm a little bit giddy today. Every once in a while we have a story that blows my mind, so I'm sure it's about to blow yours. Now, what if you found out that the government of the United States was poisoning you like ever since you were born here? Well, that is part of what this story is going to be about today. How would you stop it? Would they ever admit it? What would they do to stop you from hearing the truth? Today, we're going to be talking about fluoridation. What is put into our water, obviously, to protect our teeth. Seemed like a great idea, certainly when they introduced it, and it looked a lot like this.
Dentists in many cities are helping to bring the benefits of fluoridation to children.
Children will be healthier and happier.
Our children can have better health through fluoridated water.
Wonderful result obtained with complete safety.
Effective and cheap.
Safe, controlled amount of sodium fluoride.
They can drink away tomorrow's tooth decay.
7 years ago, something happened in this town. Something very simple happened. Something was added to this water. Added to this town's drinking water.
Grand Rapids' fight against tooth decay started when fluoride was added to the water supply.
A pumping station sends the water toward Grand Rapids. Sulfur dioxide and sodium fluoride are added after the water leaves the settling basins and before it enters the filters. This carefully controlled amount of fluoride is perfectly safe and absolutely harmless.
We sometimes say, is fluoride poison? Yes, of course it's a poison. In large doses, very simply, fluoride is safe at 1 part per million.
On file with the Dental Society are statements from members of the medical profession over and over again that they have seen no ill effects from fluoridation of the Grand Rapids water. It is completely safe.
Children in Grand Rapids have less tooth decay than they did 6 years ago, as much as 65% less.
Over 30 million people are now drinking controlled fluoridated water.
The benefits of fluoridation will last throughout life.
Now, I don't know about you, but I don't remember the last time I drank a glass of drinking water. I don't let my kids near the drinking water for a whole host of reasons, fluoridation obviously being a major one. Whether or not the science says it's safe, I don't understand why it's there at all. And given that it's ever toxic at any level, I tend to just avoid putting toxic chemicals into my body and my children. But there are so many innocent people, hundreds of millions across this country, and many of whom would not be able to afford bottled water the way that I can, and I feel blessed that I'm able to make that decision. But what about those that can't? What about those that don't know about it? And what is this stuff really doing there? Can you believe that the fluoridation of water is actually one of the top 10 achievements as described by the CDC in terms of public health? Here's that list. On the top 10 is vaccination, something that we talk a lot about here. I'm not sure I would put it there. Motor vehicle safety, safer workplaces, control of infectious diseases, decline in deaths from coronary heart disease and stroke, safer and healthier foods. I would question that one big time. Healthier mothers and babies, lots of reports on how that isn't proving to be the case. Family planning, which I guess is eugenics. I guess that's made the top 10. And fluoridation of drinking water in there at 9. Recognition of tobacco use as a health hazard. So there it is. Right there behind recognizing that smoking tobacco is not good for you is the fluoridation of our water, one of the great achievements. So what happens when the great achievement maybe proves to not be that great an achievement? You've been seeing a lot of the work that we're doing in our lawsuits, dealing with vaccinations around this country. But we're going to get deeper into this. But it won't be our first foray into this conversation. We've been reporting on this for well over a year because remember, the Informed Consent Action Network, that is our nonprofit. Our mission statement is this: dedicated to eradicating man-made disease. What is man-made disease? Things that are being put into us, making us sick that don't necessarily be there. And if we could get the morons out of the way, we'd be a lot healthier. Very simply put. So we started reporting on this some time ago. Here's what some of our reporting on this issue looks like.
Grassroots organizations took the Environmental Protection Agency to court. The plaintiffs in the case had 4 experts that had consulted and worked with the EPA setting standards in the past So one of them, he says, quote, "The evidence available today may well underestimate the true extent of fluoride toxicity. With a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, I therefore consider the elevated levels of fluoride exposure in the U.S. population a serious public health concern."
Wow.
Court for the first time, the government agents, EPA, and Michael Connett, representing Fluoride Action Network and others, were able to present their evidence. You know, the government brought in their scientists, claiming it's safe, nothing wrong. Michael Connett brought in the scientists from the JAMA study, the scientists from another Spain study, from a Canadian study, a Mexican study. I mean, we had a lot of expert witnesses, and that was really, you know, powerful in itself. But ultimately, at the end of the summer of 2020, Judge Edward Chen decided to put it on hold, what's called abeyance, until another study came out. While the delays are happening and the judge is figuring things out, millions of kids, families, and people are drinking fluoride, showering in fluoride, and being told only crazy people think there's something wrong with this.
First of all, I want to thank Derek Burrows, who's been doing great reporting on these trials. He brought it to our attention, has been reporting on that also for the High Wire. He brought up Michael Connett, who is the lead attorney in this case, and it is my honor and pleasure to be joined right now by that guy.
Thank you, Del. It's great to be here.
Michael, it's an honor to meet you in person, to have you here talking about this incredibly important issue. I want to get back to the basics before we get into where you're at now in this case. First of all, whose idea was this? Like, why pour this, you know, known toxic chemical into our water systems? What's the genius behind it?
Well, it's a great question. United States started fluoridation in 1945. The first experiment was in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and then Newburgh, New York. There were a number of interest groups that were very involved in those early days. You had the biggest industries in this country, the biggest manufacturing industries like the aluminum industry, the steel industry, the nuclear industry, who all had serious fluoride pollution problems.
Okay.
Because they were emitting a lot of fluoride into the air, into the water, and polluting downwind and downstream communities, and they had a lot of liability as a result. If you look at the documents, the fluoride polluting industries were very influential in shaping the early research on fluoride to give it a cleaner bill of health than I think the facts would show.
All right.
So you have fluoride industries that were involved.
So it's a byproduct of what types of things? Like when you say, nuclear energy, like what was it? Where's fluoride coming from?
Well, various industries use fluoride for different purposes. The aluminum industry uses fluoride as a flux. It allows the aluminum to melt at a lower temperature, so they save money by using fluoride. In the 1940s, right at the time when we began fluoridating the water, the U.S. bomb program, the Manhattan Project, was using massive quantities of fluoride because they needed fluoride to build the bomb. They needed fluoride to refine the uranium to make it bomb grade. The bomb program scientists were very intensely interested in the question of fluoride toxicity, and unbeknownst to the public at that time in the 1940s, the bomb program was overseeing the early water fluoridation experiments. Now, I'm not to say that the bomb program is responsible for water fluoridation, but they took a very keen interest in it. But there were other interest groups as well. The sugar industry, which was very concerned at that time that the government may take efforts to reduce sugar consumption in some way to deal with the massive oral health problem that the United States had back then.
Tooth decay being caused by large amounts of sugar intake.
So the sugar industry loved fluoride because fluoride is a way of, hey, don't worry about us, the sugar industry, just put some fluoride in the water and then you can deal with the oral health issues.
Who first discovered that this had some ability to harden bones or teeth or whatever this was about?
So initially, 1920s, 1930s, it came to light that fluoride in drinking water naturally occurring causes a condition of the teeth called dental fluorosis. This is a staining of the teeth, can be brown staining, can be black staining, can result in crumbling of the enamel in its severe condition. We discovered that fluoride in the water causes that condition. We also discovered that fluoride is causing a lot of other health problems in fluoride-exposed workers, bone disease, things like that. So in the 1930s, there was a growing amount of concern in the scientific community as expressed by scientists at the U.S. Department of Agriculture and elsewhere, that fluoride could be a real problem to public health.
Okay.
But simultaneous to that, in the 1930s, there were studies that were done that showed an association between fluoride in water and lower tooth decay.
Okay.
And so, based on some of those studies and some rat studies that were done, a scientist by the name of Gerald Cox, who was funded, incidentally, by the sugar industry as well as the aluminum industry.
Okay.
In 1939, Cox was the first person to suggest that we might want to add fluoride to drinking water to reduce tooth decay. As he said, the current trend towards the complete removal of fluoride from drinking water may need some reversal, because lo and behold, it may be good for teeth. So I think, Del, when you look back at the early history of this issue, it's a perfect storm of interest groups that stood to benefit from this program. And to be fair, though, there were a lot of dentists and a lot of people who looked at fluoride with great enthusiasm and optimism, because no doubt people believe this could be something that could reduce the problem that we had with tooth decay. So I don't mean to minimize the role of good intentions back in those early days, but there were also interest groups that were...
Well, they're affecting the science, as we see, right? You know, the doctors, and as we've recognized in a lot of the work that we do, I think doctors mean well. They just don't know who's actually funding the science that they're reading and who's funding the science that the EPA and the CDC and Health and Human Services start using. So in this case, once again, we have industries that would benefit at adding fluoride to the water. Sugar wants, you know, the monkey off of their back and say, well, look, we're doing something about it. Let's treat the symptom and not the problem. And then you have industries, you know, saying, look, we'd like to get rid of this, I guess in some ways, like if you made it that it was good for you, this onus that's over your pollution that you're causing with fluoride goes away a little bit too. So does this start out, I mean, did this sort of start out as just companies saying, can we reduce the fear of fluoridation? And then as they looked at it, said, wait a minute, not only can we do that, it hardens bones, so maybe we could say it has a benefit? I mean, or is someone just walking down a road and there's a tribe of Indians drinking out of highly fluoridated water and they just have gorgeous teeth and someone said, bam. I mean, what is the spark?
Well, it's $1 million question. I really think there's an entangled web of interests in those early days, including the organized dental profession, the dental trade associations, because they were very concerned in the 1940s about the potential for the government to begin to get involved with the dentistry profession to provide dental care, because there was too few dentists at that time to treat people who needed treatment.
Okay.
And so the American Dental Association and various dental groups didn't want the government to get involved with providing dental care. They wanted to keep their monopoly, if you will.
Right, sure.
And
keep it privatized. They make the money. Let's keep the government out of this.
And fluoridation was a perfect fit for them. Because, you just put some industrial pixie dust in your drinking water, and that's how you can deal with oral health. You don't get socialized dentistry, if you will.
Okay.
And so that was an interest group as well.
Interesting. Okay, so they start adding it in the water. Tell me about sort of how you get into this work. Like, what is the group that starts investigating this? Everyone's hunky-dory. Look, we love it. I mean, other than Stanley Kubrick, if I think about, in his film when they have the moment, it's fluoridation and the guy's having the meltdown. It seemed like nobody was really questioning this thing. So who starts questioning it?
Right from the very beginning, you had independent scientists with a great amount of integrity, including George Walbot, who was one of the doctors who first diagnosed some of the health problems from cigarette smoking. George Walbot was an allergist, and he saw in his own practice people who had heightened susceptibility or sensitivities to fluoride. And you had a lot of independent doctors who saw the problems from the early days, that we didn't have enough safety data. We didn't know what the long-term ramifications from adding this toxic substance to water was, and people who questioned why should we be adding a medicine, which fluoride, the Food and Drug Administration defines fluoride as a drug.
Okay.
Okay. People were concerned, why are we adding a drug to the water supply? That's taking away people's informed consent. So there was dissent from the early days, but that dissent was stigmatized, it was marginalized and ridiculed. And I think history has shown that those early dissenting voices we're really onto something, that we were dealing with a toxic compound and we were handling it in an extremely reckless manner by adding it to hundreds of millions of people's water supply.
Right.
So from the early days, there was dissenting voices in the independent scientific community, and that has persisted over time. But the science on fluoride today is much more mature, much more developed, and we know much more about how fluoride can adversely affect human health than we did back in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, medicine was in a Neanderthal stage when we think about how you test chemicals, how do you do proper trials on people. All right, so there's your lawsuit. When does your lawsuit start? What year did you begin this lawsuit? We
filed a petition with the EPA in 2016 under a statute called the Toxic Substances Control Act. And we basically, under this act, the EPA has the authority to ban the particular use of a chemical that presents an unreasonable risk to human health, including to susceptible subpopulations. So based on this growing body of scientific research on fluoride in the brain, in the developing brain, we went to the EPA and asked them to ban this practice of fluoridation on the grounds that it presents an unreasonable risk to the brain. And in February of 2017, the EPA denied our petition. And so we filed suit in federal court in April of 2017. So over 6 years ago.
You've been at this for some time. Now, who are the plaintiffs in this case? Who sort of is bringing these cases?
So we have it's a consortium of environmental health groups, as well as individual mothers and their children.
And you're not just like a first generation, fluoride investigator. Your father got into this a little bit. Tell me about that.
Yeah, my father is an environmental toxicologist, and he has been working for many years on things like dioxin emitted from incinerators and various environmental health issues, and my mother as well. And then in the late 1990s, we lived in a little small town in New York State, Canton, New York, and it was considering whether to end fluoridation, as many communities in the United States have considered that question. Should we stop adding this chemical to our water? My dad didn't know anything about fluoride, really. He always thought that people opposed to it were, a little bit crazy. He thought they were just getting the science wrong. They were mistaking fluorine for fluoride, and he didn't take the issue seriously, as I think many people who haven't looked at this issue might be in a similar situation. But he looked at it and he was really disturbed by what he found, by the number of red flags in the scientific literature indicating that fluoride exposure is associated with hip fracture, bone fragility, with effects on the thyroid gland, effects on the brain, effects on the pineal gland that produces melatonin, that regulates a number of things in the body. So my dad was disturbed by the number of red flags that the science was indicating, and from a precautionary standpoint, said it doesn't make sense to continue adding this to water and exposing people on such a widespread basis. And then I was in college at the time. I didn't know anything about fluoride, and I started to research it myself. And I've been involved since 2000 researching this issue.
When you say, so obviously when you're going to bring a case, you now need a body of evidence and science. What had shifted? I mean, obviously you have the original science that's done. I think you probably have issues with it, who's funding it. But there ends up being studies now looking at things. Let me ask you this. Since there were obvious, even in the video we saw, this whole video says, yes, it can be toxic at this amount. So they knew there was a toxic problem. So when they decided it was safe, what were they focused on? What was their concern? Like, where did they draw the line on what they would make sure it wasn't so toxic that it did blah, blah, blah. And as long as we don't have that happen, it's safe. So what were they focused on?
The early science that purported to establish the safety of fluoride is incredibly crude. And to show you how crude it is, and today, as we sit here today, safety standards in the United States are still based on what I'm about to tell you. According to our safety standards, the earliest, most sensitive endpoint of fluoride toxicity is a severe crippling bone disease called crippling skeletal fluorosis. This is an extraordinarily advanced form of toxicity. Literally, your spine is fused and it's a very advanced form of arthritis, basically.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
And under our safety standards, until you have crippling skeletal fluorosis, you're not going to be harmed by
Perfectly
fluoride.
safe. So let's just looking at crippling spinal fluorosis, back it off a notch from there, and we're in the safety zone. We're ready to go.
That's essentially what the regulations, the premise of the regulations is. All you need to protect against is this severe crippling bone disease.
I mean, I find it stunning, just from a layperson who knows nothing about this idea that you're hardening your teeth is the whole purpose of this, and no thought about hardening calcium or anything else throughout the rest of your body. Like, even if it does that, and that's a benefit, but what is it doing to the rest of my body? Something that is like hardening, turning my bones to stone, or what happens to the calcium floating in my body? All of these things have just been questions for me, but let's get to where you're at. So when you decide to bring a case, it's not because of the crippling effects that they seem to have thought they avoided from this. There are actually other issues.
Absolutely. There's many health concerns with fluoride that far precede the development of crippling skeletal fluorosis.
Right.
By the time you have crippling skeletal fluorosis, you're in a whole lot of trouble. And
Right.
but just to give you an example, just looking at the bones, let's just focus right now on the bones, leaving aside the brain, the thyroid, and the other systems in the body. Just on the bones, you have a study just out this summer, and there's been many before it, that link fluoride exposure to arthritis, to osteoarthritis. So this study from this summer finds a significant association and a strong association between low-level fluoride exposure and knee osteoarthritis, okay?
Wow.
Then you have a study a couple years ago from Sweden finding a significant association between low levels of fluoride and hip fracture in postmenopausal women. Again, these are health endpoints that will occur well before you develop crippling fluorosis. So,
and hip fracture being one of the major issues for the elderly, I know, in this country. So many of us, once your relative, has their hip fracture, like that really spells a very difficult road from there on for the rest of their life.
Right, hip fracture is a very serious concern if you're an elderly person. And so just limiting the discussion to the bones, you can see that the government standards on this are so crude. They're not accounting for the earlier effects of fluoride.
Okay.
But there's obviously a lot of other concerns with fluoride exposure beyond the bones, beyond the skeletal system, and certainly the brain is one of the key areas of research over the past 20 or so years.
Okay. Great. So there's studies then on the brain now and neurological effects and things like that. Is that when you were going in with your case, what was the science that you felt was the most compelling?
Okay. So an important point in the history of this issue is 2006.
Okay.
And the National Research Council, which is part of the National Academies of Science, at the request of the EPA, did a comprehensive review of the scientific literature on fluoride.
Okay.
And not only did they conclude that EPA safety standard is too high and needs to be lowered,
Okay.
of which the EPA has never done anything about that.
Okay. So in that black and white thing, he says 1 part per million perfectly safe. Is that what's in our water?
That's the so-called optimal level of fluoride that used to be added to water. They recently lowered that to 0.7 parts per million.
Okay. All right, great.
But the National Research Council was looking at a higher level of fluoride in water. It's called the maximum contaminant level. That is the maximum level of fluoride that communities can have in their water.
Okay, and still be okay.
Still be okay.
Okay.
And the EPA set that in the 1980s at 4 parts per million, despite getting medical advice that, quote, you'd have to have rocks in your head to allow your kid much more than 2 parts per million. And it was EPA scientific staff was strongly pushing against this standard of 4 parts per million. In fact, the Union of Scientists at the EPA tried to bring a lawsuit against their managers for implementing such a crude and unsafe standard. It's the first and only time in EPA history where you have scientific staff who are trying to join an environmental group's lawsuit against the agency because the agency's action was so crude. Fast forward to 2006, The National Research Council agrees with EPA scientists and says, yeah, this standard is too high. It is unsafe.
Okay.
You need to lower it. But the EPA has not yet taken any action in response to the NRC's recommendation.
And so so you're bringing the lawsuit then. Is the lawsuit technically against the EPA? Is that the case?
It is. Now, in that National Research Council report from 2006, one of the key findings that they discuss is fluoride's ability to affect the brain.
Okay.
And the NRC documents in detail the various changes in the brain that have been seen in animals that are exposed to fluoride. So controlled laboratory experiments, and then you give the animals fluoride, and then you take out your microscope and you look at their brain and you see if the brains are affected, and sure enough, they are. Mm-hmm. The National Research Council discussed those findings in detail and really flagged neurotoxicity, damage to the brain, as an endpoint of concern that needed much more attention. And subsequent to the National Research Council's report, there have been many additional studies, many of which in human populations, okay, that have examined the relationship between fluoride in drinking water and IQ in children.
Okay.
And these studies, most of which for a while were done in China, where you have high levels of naturally occurring fluoride in the water, these studies almost unanimously have found that when you have elevated fluoride exposure in your early years of life, that is associated with reductions in IQ. Okay?
Wow, so permanent brain damage, essentially, in your children.
Permanent reductions in cognitive performance, yes. Okay. And based on those studies, again, most of which are from other countries like China, India, Iran, then the National Institutes of Health here in this country, NIH, in about 2012, funded birth cohort studies here in North America.
Okay.
To understand whether lower levels of fluoride, the kinds of exposures that me and you would get if we drank fluoridated water here, okay, whether fluoridated water ingested by the mother during pregnancy, so prenatal, in utero exposures, whether those exposures are linked to reductions in IQ. The NIH has now funded 2 separate birth cohorts, one in Mexico, one in Canada. And there's been about 4, 5, 6 papers published. All of those analyses of these birth cohorts have shown that fluoride exposure by the mom during pregnancy is significantly associated with reductions in IQ in the children, as well as measures of ADHD, attention deficit disorder. So those birth cohort studies funded by the NIH are really the focus of our lawsuit against the EPA.
Okay. Let's get into the lawsuit. You have some amazing depositions that have come out of this, obviously put professionals on the stand and gotten to the bottom of it. I mean, again, this is one of those stories where I think prior to the work that I got into, just about 6 or 7 years ago, you have the sense that the regulatory agencies are there to protect the people from industry, from, the industries taking advantage or poisoning waterways or products that aren't really healthy for us. And in this case, you would think as soon as you started seeing reports like you're talking about, risks of things that look like Alzheimer's or brain issues, calcification, like hardening of bones, different problems like that. But certainly we start looking at infants and IQ. You would think your nation that wants to be advanced in civilization would suddenly go, wait, hold on a second. We're talking about reduction in IQ. Why is it that in your mind, you even need to bring a case when this was what regulatory agencies, they had this information. EPA is getting this information, right? And it's not lost on them. It's not lost on the CDC and NIH. This isn't happening in a vacuum. They're seeing these reports by modern science now, not some archaic 60-year-old whatever idea that was funded by the sugar industry or some nuclear regulatory agency, but actually real science is now being done with the type of technology we have. They don't do anything.
Yeah, and it's the federal government has profoundly let us down when it comes to fluoride and fluoride policies. And as to why, one of the factors is that these federal health agencies like the Centers for Disease Control really see their job as promoting fluoridation. And they've been promoting fluoridation very aggressively, like cheerleaders,
Yes.
for decades.
Yeah.
And they've taken such a strong, aggressive posture that it's absolutely safe, absolutely effective, one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century, that I think it's very difficult for them to change course. And it's about, I think a lot of the effort is about protecting policy versus protecting public health. And that's certainly what we've seen with fluoride over the years, that the EPA, for example, has always kowtowed to the dental interests and has failed to stand up for the public and to apply its risk assessment procedures to fluoride. Because if it ever did, Del, the safe dose of fluoride is far below what we're getting from water fluoridation.
Well, let's get into this case, because this is the stuff we love on this show. We can say it. It's our opinion. It's your opinion. But when you start hearing professionals under oath and what they ultimately admit, I think it changes this game completely. So we've got this head, a guy at the CDC. I want to talk about this sort of first deposition we're going to look at. Set it up for me. Who is this?
So first off, one of the benefits of this case is we had the subpoena power to actually depose under oath federal officials. Okay, which was remarkable.
Great.
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
So one of the federal officials that we deposed was the director of the CDC's Division of Oral Health, named Casey Hannon. And I asked, and I think we'll see a clip here in a second, but one of the things I asked Mr. Hannon about was the NRC's findings from 2006, where the NRC talked about these brain changes in the laboratory rats and the laboratory animals. And here I asked Mr. Hannon, does CDC accept these findings? Does CDC agree that this is what's happening in animals?
All right, so this is now 2018.
Yeah, I'm deposing him in 2018.
This is 12 years after this information has come out. Is the CDC aware of this, everybody? Take a look at this.
The next paragraph begins, fluorides also increase the production of free radicals in the brain through several different biological pathways. These changes have a bearing on the possibility that fluorides act to increase the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
And CDC agrees with that finding of the toxicologic literature.
Yes. And again, not clear if they're talking about as demonstrated in laboratory animals or in human studies.
Okay. And you see the next section of on this page is titled Anatomical Changes in the Brain.
Yes.
And it begins, studies of rats exposed to sodium fluoride or aluminum fluoride have reported distortion in cells in the outer and inner layers of the neocortex. Neuronal deformations were also found in the hippocampus and to a smaller extent in the amygdala and the cerebellum. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
And CDC agrees with that finding as a summary of the hazard.
As it relates to rat studies, yes.
So obviously, just because it affects one mammal, I guess he's thinking maybe it doesn't affect human beings. But this is the thing that is so shocking about our regulatory agencies. Anybody with blood pumping through their brain would say, but obviously, if you're seeing a rat study, CDC immediately went and started doing human studies, right? Like you got to the bottom of this and said, look, if we're seeing it in any mammal at all, this starts with animal studies. The whole point of an animal study is let's take this a step further. Houston, we've got a problem. They don't do anything.
That's right. I asked him, does CDC have any safety data on neurotoxic effects for humans? So do we know the dose that humans can ingest that will not pose problems for the brain? The answer was no.
Right. Let's take a look at this.
So just to clarify, because I think, is the CDC aware of any evidence demonstrating benefits from consumption of fluoridated drinking water during the first 6 months of life?
We are not aware of any evidence.
Okay. That clip is important, Del, because the risk of the neurotoxic effects, the risks to the brain, are really at their zenith in the earliest stages of life, in utero and during pregnancy, as well as early months of infancy. And that's because the blood-brain barrier is not yet developed. And so that the chemicals that we ingest have ready access to the brain.
Right.
So one of the things I asked CDC is there any benefit from fluoride exposure during those early stages of life that might conceivably justify incurring that risk?
Yeah, taking that risk.
And as you saw right there, when it comes to the early infancy, the first 6 months of life, his answer was no. We don't have any evidence that there's a benefit during that time frame. And I also asked him, I think we have a clip, I asked him about, well, are there any benefits during when the baby's in the womb?
All right, let's roll the clip.
So if a pregnant mother wrote an email to CDC asking, if I drink fluoridated water during my pregnancy, will that provide a benefit to the teeth of my baby? CDC would not answer yes to that question, correct?
If we were to get an email as such, we would summarize our understanding of the evidence in saying we have not found evidence that supports that shows benefit to the child if community water fluoridation or some other form of fluoride is ingested by the mother.
I mean, these are incredible points because it's the risk-benefit ratio, right? This is what we're always talking about in any sort of pharmaceutical intervention. As you said, fluoride is listed as a drug. You're putting drugs in our water. So there's always a risk to every drug. They know that this can be toxic at some level. So the question being, since we're taking on some toxic risk, a known toxic risk, how bad science will need to be done there, but certainly there's a benefit to warrant that risk. And what he's saying is we have no benefit at this point. We don't see nothing to prove a benefit.
Right. For this most vulnerable period of life, where the risk of the effects on the brain is at its greatest, there is no benefit, not some, but no benefit to justify the risk. So even if you believe, as many people do, that fluoridated drinking water has benefits for teeth, and we can discuss that at length, but even if you believe that, the fact of the matter is when you're pregnant and when a baby is less than 6 months old, there's no benefit whatsoever.
This is a little off of your lawsuit, but have you seen this like extra fluoridated water they sell in like baby stores that is designed for babies?
Yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, just based on what's said here, if there's no benefit whatsoever, why would anybody be pouring extra amounts of fluoride into their baby?
It is an incredibly irresponsible product to be sold.
Wow. All right, let's get into the NSF. Tell me about that.
Well, the NSF is this certifying body. It's a private organization. It's not a federal governmental body, but it is an organization that communities look to certify that these fluoridation chemicals that are being added to water are okay, that they've passed muster. Okay. And so as part of this deposition, I wanted to talk with them. And what have you done, NSF, to see if these chemicals in our water are safe for the brain and are not going to cause potential effects on IQ or other things like that. So I had an opportunity to speak with them, and I asked them point blank, have you done anything whatsoever to make sure that these chemicals added to over 200 million people's drinking water are safe for the brain? I asked them that.
Let's take a look.
So I'm moving now to topic 7 of the deposition notice, which reads, what NSF has done, if anything, to determine the potential for fluoridation chemicals to cause neurotoxic effects. So let me ask you, has NSF taken any steps to determine the potential for fluoridation chemicals to cause neurotoxic effects?
No.
Does NSF have any position on whether fluoridation chemicals can cause neurotoxic effects?
Since we have not conducted our own risk assessment on the fluoridation chemicals, we do not have a position on whether they are able to cause neurotoxic effects.
Okay. Has NSF taken any steps to determine the upper tolerable daily dose of fluoride that will not cause neurotoxic effects in humans?
We have not.
Does the NSF have a position on what the upper tolerable daily dose of fluoride that will not cause neurotoxic effects is?
Since we have not conducted risk assessments on any of the fluoridation chemicals, we do not have a position on the daily dose that would be appropriate to prevent or to reduce the risk for neurotoxic effects from fluoride exposure.
I mean, I find this so amazing because this is the group that's literally stamping with approval. What exactly are you approving? What does your stamp mean? And what she's saying is basically, we haven't looked at any issue. We don't do any science to see whether this is safe, whether it's causing neurological disorders, especially in the face of, at this point, we're 12 years past studies that are clearly showing a relationship from all around the world, places that have naturally occurring high levels of fluoride are seeing lowering in IQ. NSF, who's this body of professionals that give it the stamp of approval, we never even looked into it. So are they approving? I think this is like in a mercury approval group. Yep, that's mercury. Yep, it's toxic. Is that what she's telling us? Is like, that's mercury, that's fluoride. That's all we're telling you is if that's a giant pile of fluoride. What it does to you, we have no idea.
That's pretty much what they do. It's like, does it have some excess degree of contaminants of other stuff other than fluoride?
Right. Don't worry, we didn't find any vitamin C in your fluoride. It's good to go.
and Del, I got the same testimony from the CDC. I mean, I asked them, do you have this type of data? And the answer was no. I mean, have you done anything to determine the safe dose? The answer was no. And so NSF is not alone in this. However, the next time you see that NSF stamp of approval on the chemicals being added to your water, just know that that says nothing about whether this is safe for your child to drink.
What it is saying is it's there. Fluoride's there. It's fluoride. We guarantee you there's fluoride in your water. Okay, you have an EPA deposition I find fascinating because this is someone that you're deposing that's been at this quite a long time.
Right. In 2019, we had an opportunity to depose a senior scientist at EPA's Office of Water named Dr. Joyce Donahue.
Okay.
Dr. Donahue is actually EPA's subject matter expert on fluoride at the Office of Water. She's been working on fluoride issues since the 1990s. And so during the deposition, I asked Dr. Donahue about her assessment of these recent birth cohort studies from North America, the ones that have been funded by the NIH, and she gave me her thoughts on those studies.
Okay, let's take a look at this.
So you would agree that this is an important study here, a prospective birth cohort study, which is finding a significant relationship between low levels of fluoride in the urine of pregnant women and ADHD symptoms in children.
Yes.
And you would agree that this study further supports the need for a reassessment of current safety standards of fluoride in the United States.
Yes, it's one of several.
Okay. You would agree that this study right here adds further reason why we need to do a reassessment of the fluoride safety standards in the United States.
I think it's a reason for doing not just the United States. I think it's a reason for doing an update to the fluoride assessment.
Everywhere.
Well, for anybody who's interested in fluoride and the need for regulation of fluoride exposure.
Right. And anyone interested in making sure that fluoride is safe for consumption.
That people are not overexposed. Yes.
Right. Okay.
This is amazing because here's a person, this is her job. Her job is to define quality of water, right? She's a water specialist. You're talking about a study that didn't happen 6 weeks ago or 6 months ago. It literally happened back in 2006. We're now in 2019. And correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying, does this study, in your mind, as the head of our water quality department here, does this warrant further investigation into whether or not this is causing serious problems? Should there be a reevaluation of the amount, what we're doing with our water? Says absolutely, that's what this tells us.
Just one clarification.
Okay.
The studies I was asking her about were the birth cohort studies.
Oh, the more recent NIH studies.
Right, and they started to be released in 2017.
Okay, so those are more recent.
Those are more recent.
Okay.
But I did ask Dr. Donahue about the NRC's review of the neurotoxicity literature from 2006.
Okay, yeah.
And she agreed the NRC's review identified big potential problems with fluoride that needed to be evaluated. Okay, so she agreed that, oh yeah, that report had a lot
That
of
was a
red
doozy.
flags.
I mean, it's such a strange look on her face. It's like she's about to giggle. I can't figure out what's going on there. And we won't get in the weeds. I'm going to ask you to speculate. It's not what lawyers like to do. But all I can say is if I'm sitting there as a judge, and I always try to imagine, my job now is I'm listening to this, and all of a sudden something I was told was perfectly safe, and it was good for all of us, and I try to imagine what the judge is doing is they're listening to these depositions and saying, hold on a second. The government agency that I and my family and my grandchildren, I'm alive on this planet, this is affecting me, never did studies, even after showing that there's neurological effects, never looked deeper into it. Animal studies are showing definitely neurological issues. Nobody seems to be doing anything. CDC admits, yeah, that science is credible. We're just not doing anything about it. Head of EPA's water that's looking at my water saying, oh, yeah, that's always been a problem. Definitely was a problem in 2006, even more of a problem now. And not only do I think we should be reevaluating, but basically anyone in the world putting this stuff in their water should be reevaluating it. Seems to me at that moment, this is a slam dunk, case is closed. I know everyone watching this, that isn't a lawyer is like me. I'm not one. You just think, okay, so you won the case.
Well, we went to trial
Yeah.
in June of 2020.
Okay.
And had a 7-day.
So these depositions are done to prepare for the trial, but all things that are going to be in front of the judge's purview.
Right.
Okay.
7-day bench trial in front of a judge in the Northern District of California. And it's the first time, by the way, that citizen groups have ever taken a citizen petition under TSCA, the Toxic Substances Control Act,
Okay.
all the way to a federal trial. So that was a landmark in and of itself.
Good for you. We know what that is to set landmarks. Our lawyer, Aaron Siri, has pulled that off a few times for us. But these are where no man has treaded before, or woman.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
so, but we had the great fortune to be able to call to the stand some of, the most prominent experts in the field of fluoride neurotoxicity, including Dr. Philippe Grandjean, whose research on mercury and IQ is what EPA used to establish the safety standards for mercury.
Okay.
Dr. Grandjean has now been studying fluoride and is very concerned about what it could be doing to children's developing brain. So we called Dr. Grandjean to the stand. We called Dr. Howard Hu is the principal investigator of the birth cohort study in Mexico. We called Dr. Bruce Lanphier, who is a scientist who's done some of the seminal research on lead and IQ. And Dr. Lanphier is one of the principal investigators of the birth cohort study in Canada.
Okay.
We also called to the stand Dr. Kathleen Thiessen, a risk assessment scientist who has actually written reports on fluoride for the EPA in the past. And so we presented substantial expert testimony at trial, which was very compelling. And the judge at the end stated that we had presented serious evidence that raises serious questions about this policy.
Mm-hmm.
However, and I totally understand, why he would do this. At that time, Del, there was a draft report by the National Toxicology Program, which is this agency at the federal level, the Department of Health and Human Services. There's this agency called the National Toxicology Program, NTP.
I'm assuming these are scientists that are really good at studying toxins.
They are the subject matter experts on toxicology issues at the federal government.
Okay.
Right. Now, so at the time of our trial, there was a draft report out, but it wasn't yet final.
Okay.
And what the judge said is, before I render a decision in this case, I want to see what the NTP's final conclusions are.
Okay.
And until that report comes out, I'm going to put this case on hold.
All right.
Okay. So it was disappointing for me as an attorney.
Sure.
I just finished a trial. You're hoping to get a decision.
Right.
And you hear, nope, we're going to wait for this federal agency to complete a review. That gave me heartburn.
Yep.
Because I've seen the political interferences in the past.
Right, how did these reviews go and who's in there doing it? And I get you, okay?
But we proceeded to wait for the NTP to issue its final report. And we waited. And
So this
we
is
waited.
2020 was when the case ends, so you're waiting.
We're waiting.
Okay.
May of 2022, about 2 years later, I received word from an individual with knowledge that the NTP report was done and it was going to be published in 1 week on May 18th.
Okay.
Thrilled. We finally are going to get the final report, right? Report doesn't come out. So we're waiting still. We're waiting and waiting. And then we find out in July from an individual with knowledge that it looked like the report may never come out. At that point in time, I went to the judge, I filed a motion, and I said, we can't keep waiting for this report because if it may never come out. And then we're waiting forever, and we're effectively denied our day in court.
Right.
So we had a hearing with the judge.
The judge should be pissed off about that because the judge is saying, look, I'm waiting for this report too. This is important to me. Everything you said has me really alarmed, but I'm going to let the final highest level group in our federal government tell me what they think. And now they're ready to do that, but something's stalling it.
Something is stalling it. Obviously, I didn't have documents. I couldn't prove anything.
You don't even know what it's going to say.
I don't even know what the final report says.
Okay.
But I know I want to get that final report.
Especially when they start blocking it.
Yeah. Well, that
gives you a little sense maybe this is going to come out on my side, I think. Like, good chance this isn't making them look very good.
And so the judge agreed that we can no longer keep waiting for a final report.
Okay.
And he set the case for a second trial.
Okay.
So we're going, and that's going to be January 29th of next year.
Okay. Yep.
And the judge has agreed that let us consider that, the report that the NTP was going to release in May of 2022. We will consider that for the trial. But we're not going to keep waiting and waiting and waiting for a final report to come out.
Do you know what they're doing? Like, what are they trying to do? What is the waiting about? Are they trying to rewrite it? What's happening?
So, after I learned that something untoward had happened, I began filing. Christy Lavelle, who's one of the plaintiffs in the case, she began filing a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act request.
Yeah.
And we have since obtained a large number of documents that show what happened at the federal level last year, why the NTP's report was not released. And the reports make it very clear what happened.
That they're basically, there's a hang up. We have a couple emails. Let's take a look at this, and you can tell me what we're looking at. This is from Terror Sweats. I don't think a release date of May 18th is feasible. There are too many folks interested in this. And it needs to be further refined. The communication needs to be carefully thought through, and we will need to brief the ASH on this. Who's ASH?
Assistant Secretary of Health, Rachel Levine.
Okay, so we gotta tell Rachel Levine we have a problem here, and we can't release this yet. Doesn't matter that this is a government document. Doesn't matter that this government works for us, which they forget all the time and something we report on all the time. We need to hold this up. What's going on there?
Well, that email was from, I think, May 12th. The day before, on May 11th, the NTP sent an email to all the federal agencies that are interested in this, the CDC, the NIDCR, FDA, telling them the report is done, conclusions are set, we're releasing the report next week, May 18th, okay? Mm-hmm. And it was full-scale alarm. I mean, you see emails immediately flying back and forth between the NIDCR and the CDC, between NIDCR and the Assistant Secretary of Health and the Director's Office at the NIH, and they're all saying, whoa, what's going on? And they were very aggressive immediately at saying there's no way this report is coming out next week. And the emails are very clear on that. So it was a situation where the NTP scientists said very clearly, we have completed our review. Right. We've considered all of your input.
We've got a very interesting another email. This is Brian Berridge. Let's take a look at what he is saying. Hi, Tara. I have significant concerns that the level of engagement on this scientific product has crossed the line from rigorous peer review to ensure balance and accuracy to one that could be construed as attempting to influence the outcomes. He's clearly saying, all you guys are calling me, what you're asking me to do goes way beyond saying we want to do some peer review. You're telling me it seems to me, to reevaluate this and change the outcome. After 17 years in industry, he says, I've seen efforts to modify messages to fit commercial interests. I wasn't party to that there, and I'm not game to do that here. Holy cow. So this is the guy at the See?
Dr. Berridge was the scientific director for the NTP.
Oh, NTP, right.
He wrote that email the morning of May 12th after this whole, again, the NTP announced they were going to release a report the day before. And there was this fire alarm where they got a lot of input.
I'm sure he's getting yelled at on the phone and being told you are not going to release this and all, because that type of response to someone that's pissed off and basically drawing a line in the sand, which is hard to do in a federal agency like that.
And in other emails, Dr. Berridge commented on in his words, the unprecedented degree of review and scrutiny that the NTP was being subjected to by these other federal agencies. And at one point, Dr. Berridge made, I thought, a really interesting comment, and he was writing to the NIDCR. NIDCR is an institute at the NIH that focuses on the teeth. Okay? They are big proponents of water fluoridation.
Okay.
And Dr. Berridge sent an email very politely, very professionally, but he basically asked a question. How is it that you, as dentists, are peer reviewers of a report on toxicology?
It's not in your area of expertise. You don't know what you're talking about.
Right. What is it that gives you the right to basically tell us how to do our job as toxicologists? Like, this isn't your lane, right? He said it more.
This isn't a study on how it hardens the teeth. This is a study on, is it toxic?
Right. And so you do see that frustration.
So you must be psyched, though, at least you know you've got Dr. Berridge on the other side sort of standing here as this, and this is still going on, I assume, as you're coming up to this case.
Yes, the NTP has still not released a final report. But I think what we see in these emails and what we see in the documents is that there has been a group of scientists at the National Toxicology Program who have been working really, really hard in very trying circumstances with a lot of political pressure to do the best scientific product that they can do. And I think they deserve a lot of respect for their commitment to not just kowtowing, not just watering down the report or changing the conclusions, to stand by their work and to stand up for what the current science says about fluoride in the brain. And I have to say, I haven't seen that really happen at the federal level before.
No, it's really rare.
And so I really commend the scientists at NTP for really trying to do a scientifically sound analysis.
Now, you've got a copy of what they're saying is not ready to release. This is something you've got. You're going to share a couple of quotes from this piece. Let's take a look at what we are now showing you, folks. You're seeing here on the Highwire, NTP Board of Scientific Council's Working Group report on the draft State of the Science monograph and the draft meta-analysis manuscript on fluoride. Here's a few of the quotes. Reported associations between higher fluoride exposure and lower children's IQ are consistent in the vast majority of studies of both low and high quality. Doesn't matter how good the study is, they're all coming to the same conclusion. Several of the highest quality studies showing lower IQs in children were done in optimally fluoridated 0.7, what is that?
Milligrams per liter or ppm.
Okay, areas. So basically saying even when it's the right dose, similar to what we're giving in drinking water, I'm assuming they're saying.
That's the exact level of fluoride that we add to drinking water in the United States.
So even at that dose, we are seeing problems. Okay, it goes on to say it's always easy to call for more research, and we agree that targeted research can certainly add clarity to the existing data, particularly at lower exposure levels. However, hundreds of human and animal studies have been published on this topic. Basically, we are telling you we are not left wanting. We are telling you this stuff is toxic, the levels it's being given to American citizens.
Yeah, and the NTP identified 72 human studies on fluoride and IQ. 72.
Wow.
And of those, they found that 19 of them were high-quality studies. And of those 19 high-quality studies, 18 found an association between elevated fluoride exposure and reduced IQ. So 18 out of 19 high-quality studies showing a similar effect, namely fluoride reducing IQ in children. So in the NTP's own words, as you saw there, the vast majority of studies that have looked at fluoride exposures in human populations have found associations with reduced IQ.
Unbelievable, and it's really shocking. We've shown this again. This is in the top 10 greatest achievements by our regulatory agencies. The government of the United States is putting this stuff in your water. And now one of the top, actually the top toxicology group in our federal government just said it's toxic, the levels we're giving this is a problem. And now that's being held up. You're going into court. So what are you hoping is going to happen in this case in January?
And let me just, if I could, just one clarifying point
Sure.
for the NTP. I mean,
Yeah.
the NTP is cautious in a lot of their language.
Yeah.
I don't think the NTP would, like, they're not saying water fluoridation is harmful or we know that water fluoridation is causing IQ loss. They're more cautious, but what they do say is they have resisted the repeated requests by the CDC and the fluoridation proponents at the federal level to add language that says, don't worry about this if you're drinking fluoridated water. There's nothing to be worried about at 0.7 ppm, right? The NTP has said, no, we're not going to add that language because it's not justified, because there is a basis for concern at those levels.
Right.
And that's where the NTP is coming from. They're not saying we know it's causing IQ loss at the optimal level, but they are saying certainly with the data we have, there's a real reason for concern. And that's what the CDC and the NIDCR cannot accept, because they insist that the NTP add language that tells the public, don't worry, if you're living in a fluoridated area, there's nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
And the NTP has resisted that, and I think that's to their credit.
Yeah.
Because as scientists, they say you can't say that with the data that we now have.
I mean, you have to read it. Obviously, when we read these things, they're nice to each other. They play nicey nice between different departments. But this department is saying, look, we are not going to tell people this is safe.
Yeah.
Right? What you're not getting here is a stamp of approval from
Absolutely.
us, right?
Absolutely.
Now, you read what we're showing you, hundreds of studies, animal studies, almost on every level, every time it's done. Bad quality, good quality, high levels, low levels, same levels we're getting in our drinking water. They're having a similar result. There is, a toxic effect. There's an IQ drop. This is something that it certainly does not warrant being called safe.
Yeah, and I think it, really raises the question, should we continue adding a neurotoxicant to the water of over 200 million people in this country? And that fluoride that you add to water doesn't just go into the water, it goes into all the processed foods and processed beverages made with that water, like your sodas or your beers or whatnot. So people
And you were saying baby formula, one of the biggest, when you're using baby formula, they're getting much higher levels than even a breastfeeding mother that's diluting the levels that are coming through her body. Those are directly going in. When we look at this, right now, where we're at, what are you hoping? In January, we have a case. This judge is going to look at whether or not they've released it or not. It's my understanding they're going to look at what you now are holding. Whether they say we've signed off on it or not, this is going to appear in a court.
Right. The judge is going to have that NTP report from last year.
Okay.
He's going to have the NTP's responses to all the agency criticisms. Okay. And he's also going to have all of the studies that have been published since the trial. Okay. And so the judge is going to be able to consider this more recent evidence, including the NTP's assessment, and make a judgment about whether fluoridation chemicals added to water pose an unreasonable risk to human health.
And that's your question.
That's the question.
We want the judge to determine whether or not this is an unreasonable risk to public health.
Yes, and if the judge rules that there is a risk, then the statute requires the EPA to take steps to eliminate that risk. So the EPA will be bound by law to eliminate the risk posed to the brain by fluoridation.
Incredible work, really, Michael. So what is the call to action? We have I have a great audience that actually get involved, do something. What can they do right now to help this move along?
Well, certainly if anyone out there wants to support the lawsuit, then if anyone wants to donate, you can do so by going to momsagainstfluoridation.org. And also, I highly recommend that people tune in to the trial, because the trial will be by Zoom.
Really?
Right, by Zoom. So it starts on January 29th, 2024. And it's at, and if you go to momsagainstfluoridation.org or Fluoride Action Network's website, you will find all the information as to how you can go access the Zoom trial. But I really think this is an incredible educational opportunity for people to hear what the scientists at this highest level are saying about this issue of fluoride in the brain. They're going to hear from the best experts on the independent scientists who are raising concerns, and they're going to hear from the government's people. So they're going to hear the back and forth, and I think it will be a great educational process.
Thank you for making that all happen, Michael, and thank you for taking the time to come out here to Texas, bring us the whole scoop. Really honored to meet you. Thank you for your work. It's people like you that give me hope that we still have a chance here in the level of corruption we see in regulatory agencies. Why our agencies are not rushing forward to protect us and saying we need to get on studies, we need to figure out what to do here, whether it's reduce it or take it all the way out of the water system. When we see them just protecting their own butts, protecting bad mistakes they've made, that's a problem. It's people like you that make a difference. So thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Del. It's great to be here.